Welcome to E Squared Emporium for all things AP Psychology. Today we're going to fill out your chart on all the various drugs. Now, when it asks for a physical symptom, you're looking for what's happening in the body. When it asks for a psychological symptom, you're asking for what's happening in the mind. So, stimulants. Stimulants increase brain activity. They improve alertness, attention, and mood. They speed up the messages traveling between the brain and the body, that would be the neurons. And they make a person feel more awake, more alert, more confident, and more energetic. Some examples you see there: amphetamines, meth, cocaine, caffeine, nicotine, ephedrine, Adderall. So they increase the synaptic levels of the dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. Again, that's dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. Depressants. Depressants slow down the brain activity. They make them more effective for treating many conditions with depressants. Side effects: drowsiness, decreased inhibition, inhibition meaning like your desire to do things in public you wouldn't normally do. They can enhance your mood, reduce anxiety and stress, slow reaction time. They also impair your judgment. You think it sounds like a great idea. They slow your breathing. They increase your risk of accident or injury. We see a lot of injuries in the ER because of depressant use. They can lead to vomiting, nausea, blackouts, memory loss, slurred speech, loss of motor coordination, weakness, headaches, lightheadedness, blurred vision, dizziness, low blood pressure, physical dependence, unconscious, coma, and death. Death is usually the worst symptom. One of the most popular ones we're going to talk about: alcohol, but also GHB, barbiturates, anti-anxiety, tranquilizers, and antipsychotic drugs. So what do they do in the neurotransmitters? They increase the GABA. And so by increasing GABA, that actually increases your sleepiness. So while it seems like you're the life of the party when you start with alcohol, it eventually makes you very tired. So depressants are very, very dangerous to mix with alcohol, and people try that, and that's a very dangerous combination because you're often mixing an upper with a downer, or you're mixing two depressants because alcohol is a depressant. Opioids, also known as narcotics, also known as opiates. They are currently the most powerful type of drug addiction that we see due to the potent effect of endorphin neurotransmitters. So remember endorphins, those were the ones that relieve pain. And so opioids go fill that receptor. So they relieve pain, anxiety, they give you feelings of well-being, but you also have a decreased awareness of what's happening around you, a decreased awareness of the outside world. They can lead to sleepiness, vomiting. High doses can cause death. Again, death is the worst symptom. Unconsciousness. And there's a very high risk of overdose and addiction with opioids, and very, very painful withdrawal symptoms. The whole body literally aches as you're coming off of opioids. So you can see here the list: opium, heroin, pain relievers, codeine, and most of our cough syrups, morphine, oxycodone and oxytocodone, and fentanyl. So they are highly addictive. They offer pleasure, but they also offer pain relief. And what we now know what happens to them: they make the sensory neurons actually feel even more pain. It makes the sensory neurons like hyperactive to pain. So when you try to quit, you feel more pain and more pain and more pain. And that's why you need to keep taking them or keep taking more. They actually will make you feel pain all over your body. So opiates also cross the placental barrier if you're pregnant, and they can get right into your infant, right into the womb. We call these teratogens, and they're highly, highly toxic. In the movie The Wizard of Oz, you might recall when they were running through the poppy fields and they got suddenly very sleepy and they had to take a little nap and it was snowing. All of that was reference to the opium trade and to opioids and narcotics. Now, cheese also mimics opiates, so we need to wear the cheese patch to fight our cheese addiction. It hits the same receptor sites, the same neurotransmitter sites when we have cheese, which is why people say, "Oh, I could never give up my cheese. I could never give up my dairy." Well, it's hitting that same site. That's why we find it so comforting and soothing. So alcohol is a depressant. It causes less anxiety. We get less anxious. We get less inhibited. but eventually it leads to sedation, very, very sleepy, very, very tired. It impairs the motor cortex, so it will eventually impair your movements. You'll start to slur your speech. You'll start to stumble. You think that you can drive fine because it is impairing your brain making those types of decisions. But in reality, you have a very impaired motor cortex. It can depress the medulla, so that means it slows down the medulla oblongata, which controls your breathing. And if we don't breathe, we don't live, and that can lead to death. So there's a wide variety here of beer, wine, hard liquor, and it can be found all over the place, this particular drug. So it impacts so many parts of the nervous system. We'll just hit the highlights here. It affects GABA, glutamate, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. So alcohol can also cause short and long-term effects on the brain. Studies have shown that it kills your brain cells and you can't get those back. It reduces the neurotransmitters in your brain. In fact, you can get severe brain damage caused by too much alcohol and also severe liver damage. The brain damage is called wet brain. You also get something called delirium tremens, or the DTs. We see this a lot in detox centers. You literally are having hallucinations while you're wide awake. You are seeing people or seeing things that are not really there. We see this in a lot of alcoholics. So, can a person die from drinking too much alcohol? Yes. Alcohol poisoning occurs when the body is overcome by the ethanol and the liver can't process anymore if you drink too much too fast. And this can happen the first time that you drink too much. So, it could be your first party ever and your first keg party ever. There are 85,000 deaths from alcohol per year. So there's also something called AUD, alcohol use disorder, and typically we just say alcoholic or alcoholism. So this is highly addictive. 19 million people will develop alcoholism. So we see binge drinking and hazing are very serious right now on college campuses, and they do lead to a lot of deaths, particularly when people are underage drinking. They're too afraid to call the cops. And so they leave their friend there, just passed out on the couch, and they didn't realize that their friend had stopped breathing. Fetal alcohol syndrome can also come out of using too much alcohol. So if a woman does not know that she's pregnant, and she often won't know for the first 7 weeks, so that could be 7 weeks of going to parties and drinking too much. So you could end up with a baby that suffers from FAS, F-A-S, fetal alcohol syndrome. You get malformations of the head. You get brain defects. Typically, we see a lower IQ. You could have speech problems, a preemie baby, quite underweight, and we'll talk more about fast babies in our development chapter. Moving on to heroin. Heroin has definitely gotten more dangerous. In 1980, it was only 7% pure, what was out there on the streets. Nowadays, the heroin that is out there is 50% pure. So heroin relieves pain, anxiety. It causes feelings of well-being. It's a decreased awareness of the outside world. Again, you kind of don't care what's happening in the outside world. You're in your own little bubble. It does cause pain relief, so that those endorphin receptors are being hit because it falls under the opioids. It has an opiate euphoria. Euphoria is like bliss. You're in total bliss. So it's this described as this state of mind, state of consciousness where you're not waking and you're not sleeping, you're somewhere in between. There are many ways that people use this: injecting, smoking, or snorting. So it is a depressant. It has a very high risk of overdose. It is highly, highly addictive. And we see that the brain already has those naturally occurring receptors for endorphins, and they respond very quickly to opiates, which is why it's so easy to get addicted. We also see that in the GI tract, in the stomach, we have receptors for endorphins. So that's two parts of the body that actually can get highly addicted. Side effects, well, you get very sleepy, like you don't want to go to work and you don't want to care for your kids, and you don't go to work for weeks. Very high doses can cause death. Again, death is the worst symptom. Unconsciousness and trying to get off of heroin usually requires a professional or a rehab program. The withdrawal symptoms are very painful: hot flashes, cold flashes, severe sweating like you have the worst flu ever, muscle tremors, nausea, stomach cramping, vomiting, constipation. The symptoms can last for 5 to 8 days. People describe it as the worst week of their life. And of course, they want to go back and do more to avoid feeling like that. It also can depress or stop your breathing, and many people die from respiratory failure. Now, caffeine is a socially acceptable stimulant and it is widely used. It's the most widely used psychoactive drug in the entire world. So, it is described as a mild stimulant, but of course, if you have the high doses that are in, say, a monster, it becomes more than a mild stimulant. It produces physical and psychological stimulation. So we use it to decrease our fatigue, to be less drowsy, to stay awake, to have a cram session. People use it in college to stay up really late and study. It does create a feeling of being alert. It does improve reaction times. For a little while, it will eventually cause you to crash. It is found in coffee, tea, even green tea, chocolate, hot chocolate, and all energy drinks. And most energy drinks are 4 to 5 times the amount that's found in coffee. The addiction causes headaches. You get jittery, shaky, you get anxiety, you can get nauseous, you can get stomach cramps, you get tremors, you can have insomnia and not sleep. So these are the symptoms of caffeine overdose. You can see flashes in your eyes, you can hear ringing in your ears, your skin gets extra sensitive to touch or pain. You get a rapid, fluttery heartbeat like you're having a panic attack. It can get really irregular. You get all kinds of gastric issues. You get very dehydrated. You can start to spike a fever. You have to urinate a lot because it's dehydrating you. Your respiratory system, you're rapidly breathing. You can have muscular seizures, trembling, twitching. And in your central nervous system, you get irritable. You might snap at people. You get anxiety. You get restless, confusion. You can go to delirium, headaches when you try to get off of it, and insomnia. So, what does caffeine do? Well, we know it blocks receptors in the brain, and that's what causes the stimulation. It also affects multiple neurotransmitters. We're just going to look at them here: dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, which we say ACH, serotonin, glutamate, and GABA. And this is what it looks like in your energy drinks. So, a brewed cup of coffee has about 72 milligrams. But if you look at the chart above, a monster drink has 270. So 200 milligrams more than a normal cup of coffee. And a caffeine tablet has 200 as well. So you can see how high some of these numbers are. Moving on to another stimulant, cocaine, which actually used to be sold in Coca-Cola. That is not a myth. That is actually true. It is a powerful stimulant from the South American coca plant. It is an agonist, and between 1896 and 1905, Coca-Cola did have it as part of their ingredients. It was a health tonic for elderly people, and boy, it made them feel really good. They felt great. So, what is cocaine? It is an intense euphoria, that's that bliss producing stimulant. It has very strong addictive potential. It is illegal. It is considered a street drug. It typically looks like a fine white crystal powder. You have to be very careful with cocaine because street dealers will cut it in order to expand their supply. They will cut it with cornstarch, talcum powder, flour. They cut it with rat poison. They cut it with other drugs. So it looks like they've given you more cocaine and they make more money, but it could be very, very dangerous because you don't know what you're actually taking. So in the 1980s, cocaine could be turned into crack, which were smaller rocks that were cheaper and easier to deal with. So they were made by mixing baking soda and water into crystals and then reheating them. And it became a huge epidemic. We had babies born that were already addicted. So again, it's a stimulant. Do not feed it to your bears. It makes people feel like they have more energy and they're extra alert. You feel restless, like you're got to keep moving, got to keep moving, got to keep moving. You pacing, you're irritable, you're anxious, you get paranoid. But it can also lead to very bizarre, very unpredictable, and sometimes violent behaviors in certain personalities. The effects appear almost immediately as soon as it hits your system, and they can disappear within a few minutes to an hour. And this you definitely can build up your tolerance to. So people will need more and more and more. So, a very high level of addiction. Here's the things that could happen: you could lose your sense of smell. You could get nosebleeds. It actually can cause nasal damage. I'll show you a picture in a minute of someone whose their entire nose has caved in and they lost the whole bridge of their nose. You could have trouble swallowing. You could have asthma. You could have trouble breathing. You get infections like pneumonia. You get malnourished because you forget to eat because you're so speedy for so long. You get movement disorders and Parkinson's disease. You can get scarring inside the body, collapsed veins. If you're using needles with cocaine, you have a higher risk of HIV and hepatitis C. It can lead to stroke, heart attack, coma, and the worst symptom, death. So, yeah, here's a brain on cocaine. Using cocaine can induce long term changes in the brain. They've done animal studies to show that being exposed to cocaine actually changes your brain. It's a neuroadaptation within the brain that actually changes the structures of the brain. And this picture is of a man who used cocaine. He snorted it through his nose so often that you can see his entire nose has collapsed. So, cocaine is an agonist. Let's look at how it works. It impacts the neurotransmitters norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Dopamine is blocked there by the picture, but you see dopamine on the next line. So, let's look at how it blocks dopamine. By blocking dopamine, it leaves the dopamine neurotransmitter in the synaptic gap longer. So dopamine is now in the cerebral spinal fluid and looking and seeking its site longer. So this neurotransmitter is going to rapidly hit the receptors trying to get in, which causes that euphoria, that happiness, that blissed out state, that speedy state. But excess cocaine will lead to a physical addiction in the neurons. The body will stop using receptors. If you're not using it, the body's going to remove all the other receptors. So basically, because the receptors are being blocked, the body says, oh, well, you're not using them, so they're just going to go away. And then when the drug wears off, you feel depressed, you feel miserable, you feel horrible, and you need to go feel good again, so you go use more. So then you have less receptors for the dopamine neurotransmitter to hit, and then it blocks it, and then you lose more and more and more. So, looking at psychedelic drugs, the only one we're really focused on this year is marijuana. Marijuana is a natural plant. It's a mixture of the leaves and the flowers of the cannabis plant. It is hemp comes from the same family, but hemp is more the trunk and the parts of the plant that are actually used for rugs and fabric and all kinds of things that you can use hemp for, but it does not contain the THC. It's the THC that's the major active ingredient of marijuana. Now, this has also increased. Between 1995, THC levels were only 3.96, so 4% THC levels. But by 2022, THC levels are now 16%. And if you go to an official dispensary, they can give you a THC concentration that's more than 40%. So we went from 4% to 40%, and that's why we're seeing some different symptoms and some different research. So THC can cause changes in mood and thoughts and perceptions of reality. It definitely can inhibit your memory, very poor memory, inattention, impaired learning. So chronic use we know has harmful effects on the central nervous system. It can impair your coordination, it can impair your performance, it can cause anxiety, it can create suicidal tendencies, psychotic symptoms, and increase mood disorders. We also see it decreases male fertility. When someone wants to become a father, it is a very good idea that they stop using marijuana for a long time before they try that. You can see this brain, the two brain scans. The one that's impacted, that is a person who's only 18 years old, but they have been a daily user of marijuana and they are only 18 years old, and you can already see there are holes in their brain, and there's a very different shape to their brain. So the neurotransmitters involved with marijuana: glutamate, GABA, noradrenaline, dopamine, 5-HT, which is not one that we have on our list, and acetylcholine. So these are psychedelic drugs that are not on our list this year, but you might have heard of them: LSD, psilocybin, which are mushrooms, and there is a lot of research coming out right now about psilocybin; mescaline, which comes from peyote cactus; and then there's designer drugs, MDMA and ecstasy. The majority of these create hallucinations. They can alter your perception, they alter colors. Some people claim to have spiritual experiences. They can create a euphoric rush and a very warm feeling. They can heighten your sensations. They do also have negative impacts on the brain. MDMA and ecstasy and a lot of our designer drugs are showing some very negative effects in animal studies. And when you take a trip or a hit, you never know if it's going to be a good or a bad experience, and you're kind of stuck in that experience. It can last for 6 to 12 hours before you can come down and figure out what is reality again. So, this is what it looks like when you have a psychedelic drug in your system. It inhibits the neural functions in the brain, and the brain creates these types of hallucinations. So, which one is the most addictive, the most likely to get hooked? Well, marijuana is only 9%, alcohol is 15%, heroin and cocaine, which I told you were highly addictive, they're 23%. But the worst one that we're not even talking about is tobacco and vaping. There's so much research out there that vaping might even be worse than the original tobacco, and 32% chance of addiction. And that's again from your first time trying it. So those are the ones where we see the most amount of addiction. And now we're ready to do Mouse Party. I will have all the links online for you, and I will show you how to do Mouse Party.